The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. We have new, incredibly restrictive abortion laws passed in Mississippi, where the governor signed into law yesterday what is being called the most restrictive abortion measure in the United States. This was immediately challenged in court by an abortion rights group and advocates who say it is totally unconstitutional. This is a bill that disgustingly, not shockingly, but disgustingly, the Republican governor of Mississippi, Phil Bryant, was proud to sign. It bans all abortions after 15 weeks of gestation with some exceptions. And the law takes effect immediately. The previous Mississippi law started at 20 weeks after conception, and that's closer to what you see in 17 other states. And normally 20 weeks is sort of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The red line, the threshold for states that are very anti-abortion. Those 17 states putting the limit at 20 weeks. And now Mississippi, 15 weeks. And abortion rights advocates are saying that this is specifically targeting the one and only abortion provider in the state, which is the Jackson Women's Health Organization. And it just so happens that they do abortions up to 16 weeks after conception.
Yeah, I think this is their strategy going forward because they can't outright ban abortion. They'll pass a 15-week bill and then next year a 12-week bill and try to get down to like 5 weeks and maybe altogether not have it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess without banning it altogether, the closest you can get is banning it beyond close to the earliest point at which you can detect a pregnancy, right? And I actually don't know. I know that this is not an area in which I specialize, but what I've heard is that there are now pregnancy tests that work really soon after conception, like maybe even as little as a couple weeks. But imagine for a second that you can't detect pregnancy before 4 weeks and you can't get an abortion after 5 weeks. What you're effectively doing is narrowing the window for an abortion to a 7-day period. And if you don't live near maybe the one place in your state where you can get an abortion, it is effectively a ban on abortion, but not in name, right?
Especially if you can't get there, if you don't have means of transportation, if you can't get work off, there's no way that you can do that.
One thing I want to talk about here, and this is often, it's often most clearly illuminated by the abortion debate, is that we need to not fall into the logic game or rhetorical game, I think is a better one, of when we hear from the right that you can't really say on which day it goes from being a bunch of cells to a life, that therefore the only answer is no abortions at all. And there's an analogy that's used because how do these conversations often go? Okay, well, listen, we should say the limit is 20 weeks. Okay, so
then maybe the fetus feels pain at that point.
Whatever logic you want to use, right? Someone can say, is the fetus at 20 weeks different than the fetus at 19 weeks and 6 days? It's like, no, it's not. It's not that different. It's only 1 day of development difference. Okay, so should it really be 20 weeks? Shouldn't it be less than that? And then that's how you get this infinite regression to there should be no abortion whatsoever. But apply it to like a speed limit, right? Imagine a road where the speed limit is 35 miles an hour. And of course, that assumes that that's on a dry day. Of course, if it's snowing or raining, then you've got to use sort of common sense. 35 mile an hour speed limit. In a lot of cases, going 36 miles an hour on that road is going to be perfectly and totally safe. It's also possible that depending on the vehicle you have or the angle at which you took the turn or who knows what, that there are circumstances where even on a dry day at 34 miles an hour, it might not be a super 110% fail-safe speed. So would it be logical to say, listen, since some days 36 would be safe and some days 34 might not be safe, we can't possibly agree on what a speed limit should be, so let's do away with speed limits altogether. Nobody would say that, right? So with a lot of these issues, we just have to sort of accept, listen, these situations don't change drastically with every mile per hour. They don't change drastically with every day. But as humans, we need to be able to come up with some number, some amount of time before which it's legal to go and get an abortion. And that is a trick that the anti-abortion right will often use in order to get us into this infinite regression. And we got to not fall for it. I think it's just an important thing not to fall for. I guess that's all I had to say about that story. But we will see. It's being appealed. It's effective immediately. It's being appealed. This is terrible for women in Mississippi.
The only other thing I can think of is that at 15 weeks, some women may not even realize that they are pregnant, especially depending on their body type. And then you find out that you are, and it's already too late to have an abortion. I think that's why it has to be pushed back at least another month.
Well, I mean, I guess if you are 15 weeks would be several menstrual cycles.
3 months.
So you should probably, the exception would be if you were on a type of birth control that prevents your period.
Yeah.
But even then,
that sort of thing can be irregular for some women too.
Right. That would also make it unlikely that you would be pregnant to begin with, although of course everything is possible. But yeah, it's very early for a number of different reasons. We have had some really horrible, tragic news about autonomous vehicles. Uber in California has started testing, in Arizona, has been testing autonomous vehicles. And an autonomous car operated by Uber with an emergency driver at the wheel struck and killed a woman on a street in Tempe, Arizona. And this is believed to be the first pedestrian death associated with self-driving technology. The company Uber immediately suspended testing of autonomous cars in Tempe, as well as Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Toronto, which were the other cities where they were testing autonomous cars. And this has led to a lot of very black-white statements from a lot of different people. There are those who are saying autonomous cars are a disaster. We've got to get rid of autonomous cars, period. And of course, the counter to that is, well, non-autonomous cars killed way more than just one person that day, right? Tons of people are killed every single day by manually driven cars, non-autonomous vehicles. So number one, I would sort of hesitate to jump to ban all autonomous cars. The other thing is that I've not seen the details of exactly how this crash happened. And that's also something that sort of needs to be looked at to understand the circumstances.
Looks like a woman was walking her bicycle maybe on the side of the road, and the autonomous car just didn't recognize her.
Right.
But details still haven't come out. Like, I don't think her name has been released yet.
Yeah. So I think we've got to be careful, right? This is an absolute and total tragedy. Every car accident is a tragedy. Is it more tragic than the thousands and thousands of people that die in car accidents every year because it was an autonomous vehicle? I don't know. I guess I'm not sure. I mean, I know people can easily say, well, autonomous driving technology is optional. So if there's any harm that is caused by it, then we should get rid of it. Over the long run, it's probably going to reduce the number of car accidents.
Sure. Oh,
so
yeah,
I just don't know that that's a good argument. I think we've just got to. I think this is tragic and it's horrible, and statistically, it was bound to happen.
Right.
I mean, it sucks, right? It sucks, but people die because of cars all the time, and it was bound to happen. And I'm just not ready to say, well, scrap autonomous cars as a result of this.
So here's a question. Who do you think is responsible for the crash? Obviously, it's not the pedestrian. I don't think when a car hits a pedestrian, it's ever the pedestrian. Even if they're jaywalking or whatever.
I think if you're jaywalking, the car is not at fault.
I always thought that the person operating the car, regardless of the scenario, has to make sure not to hit a pedestrian.
No, because imagine you could be in the middle of a block where there's no crosswalk and someone literally just darts across the street.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be at fault for that. I mean, you're certainly not. And in no state I've ever looked at the law would you be at fault as a driver.
Okay.
I think here the blame is with the company, right? Because they had a human driver that was there. And
he could have taken over at any point.
Yeah, and these were limited testing venues approved. So they were in Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Tempe, Arizona, and Toronto. And my guess would be that part of the legal arrangement to allow this is that Uber, through the human driver, is taking responsibility for the actions of the autonomous car. That's my guess.
So here's the point I was trying to get to. Usually when a driver hits a pedestrian, it's the driver who's at fault.
Right.
Rarely is it like the car's manufacturer, unless you can prove that, the brakes went out or there's something that went wrong with the car. I think in just about any instance where an autonomous car hits a pedestrian, the liability and the responsibility is going to be on the company. So maybe that would prevent companies from exploring this market, right? Why would they want to get involved in a industry where this could happen all the time?
Yeah, that's a debate. That's a debate that's going on, and
that's a cost-benefit.
Raises a lot of questions as far as the insurance industry and how do you insure. What exactly is an insurance company insuring if it's an autonomous vehicle? Is it insuring the programming that came from the manufacturer? Because if the driver is merely the owner and is not actually doing any of the driving, that sort of changes the insurance relationship. We don't have answers to this stuff right now. We'll sort of have to wait and see. A 13-year-old girl in Mississippi has died after being shot by her 9-year-old brother fighting over a video game controller. This happened in northeast Mississippi in Monroe County, where the sheriff, Cecil Cantrell, told the Washington Post earlier this week about the incident. He was in the area. He was the first to respond, and he says when he arrived, it was a horrible, horrible scene. The boy wanted the video game controller. The sister wouldn't give it to him, and the little boy managed to get a gun out of a nightstand in the room, came over, and shot the girl. Girl was taken to a hospital, didn't make it, had to be flown to a bigger hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, and the bullet hit the girl's head. I mean, it entered her brain from the back of the head, and then she did die. The family hasn't been identified. So horrible and tragic, right? Yeah. Horrible and tragic, like every single one of these. There are real criminal questions here. If the gun is unlocked in a nightstand, does that mean that the parents, whoever the gun is licensed to, is liable here? I believe the answer is yes, although there are a couple different issues. If you are legally required to keep guns locked up and or unloaded, then there is a very clear criminal violation here. If not, you now have to prove that the owner of the gun was negligent with it, and without any clear standard for what that means, nobody might end up getting trouble for this. Now, you could say, listen, David, the tragedy of losing the 13-year-old girl and having a 9-year-old boy who now is going to know for the rest of his life that he shot his sister with a gun, that is punishment enough for the family. And I wouldn't disagree with you that that is absolutely horrible punishment. The problem is, if the law doesn't take this as seriously as is possible based on how the law is written, you're not going to have any effect on others who might be in the same scenario. So I think you do have to take this seriously.
I think so too, but because their daughter was so tragically shot and killed, that's obviously going to feel like it's punishment enough for them. And, you know, punishment maybe not even be the right word because...
Repercussions enough?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like they've suffered enough. Enough suffering? I don't know.
Right. So would any prosecutor press charges against these parents knowing that they're already suffering and this is like the last thing they want to deal with? I don't know.
This is the problem with a lot of these cases where when a gun is handled negligently and something horrible happens, we often see no prosecution because the people you'd be prosecuting are also often indirect victims of what took place. How do we talk about, the right often likes to say, before we pass new gun safety laws, enforce the laws that we have. I kind of agree. If we don't enforce the laws that we have, what good are they? And for anybody, so on both sides, if conservatives are saying before we pass more laws, let's enforce the laws we have. If those on the left are saying we want stricter gun laws, part of that is the actual strict application of the laws you have. It would seem to me that left and right should be united in the enforcement of the laws that we have, and negligent firearms discharges are absolutely on that list.
And does the 9-year-old boy go to a juvenile detention center?
No.
He's 18 or
absolutely
21?
Not.
You
no
think
way.
Because it's too young? Maybe he didn't understand what he was doing?
Absolutely. 9 years old. I mean, I understand that at 9, you definitely get conceptually that guns are a thing that you use to hurt other people.
9 isn't like 6.
9 is not 6. I agree with that. But at 9, I don't send a kid to a juvenile detention facility. Absolutely not.
Yeah. I wonder if playing all those video games did make an impact on him. I wouldn't make the same argument for an adult, but maybe he thought that he could just hit the reset button and his sister would come back to life. I don't know.
I'm not, without subscribing to video games make people more violent in the real world with people who have no predisposition to that violence, I don't subscribe to that. I do think that part of the picture of why a 9-year-old who does this should not be sent to a juvenile detention facility until they're 18 or 21 is media exposure can definitely be part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of as far as I'd be ready to go. Horrible, horrible story. Send me your thoughts. Should there be repercussions for the parents here? Should there be repercussions for the kid? Send me your thoughts on both.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.